Welcome to my fourth video in my DIY electric skateboard videos tutorial series. In this video we're going to talk about all of the parts you need to build an electric skateboard. In my previous videos I talked about how to build a deck, how to finish it, how to add hardware, and now we're finally getting to the electrical components. This is not going to be a video about how to put anything together. This is simply going to be what parts you need, what are the specs you should be looking at, and what places should you be looking for these parts. So clearly the first thing you need is a deck. This is a deck that I made from plywood. I made this in my workshop back home. I'm currently in my dorm room right now finishing this up. If you want to know how to make one, please go back and look at the two videos I made about making your own longboard deck. Next thing you're going to need would be trucks. These are a pair of caliber 2 trucks I bought off Amazon. Caliber 2 means what the material it's made out of. Caliber 2 is very durable. You don't need anything tougher than that. These also have a 50-degree turn radius, so in instance, when you turn these trucks, which is very difficult to do by hand, has 50 degrees of rotation, and so when you're looking at that, the more degrees you have of rotation, the easier it's going to be able to turn, so you can make a lot of those tight turns, but you're also going to have decreased stability at higher speeds. So if it's going to be a little bit of a shaky ride if you're going like 30 plus miles an hour, but it's really great on a college campus. You have to make those tight turns and you're not going to really be able to go that fast anyway. I bought these off Amazon for a very reasonable price. These are very good. I really don't recommend going anywhere else because they're just going to charge more. Amazon has the best deal on these. Riser pads are important because they absorb some shock. They're very hard, so you don't really get a whole lot of shock absorption, but you do get some. They also raise the deck up a little bit, which is important for protecting your motor. I bought these from a guy who makes skateboards on YouTube. He has a shop, but he was the only place I found half-inch riser pads that were rubber and not plastic. Make sure you get rubber, not plastic. But these are total recommend. Getting half-inch, not quarter-inch. You probably get away with quarter-inch, but I would just get riser pads just to get something to separate your trucks and your deck. Next thing you're gonna need is wheels. So you're going to notice in my previous videos I had white wheels. I just ordered a new set of black ones because white gets incredibly dirty and gross instantly, and I really was not the look I was going for. So I bought these black wheels from the same dealer I bought the other wheels from off eBay. Incredibly insane deal, like 30 bucks for the 4 wheels, 97 millimeters. I strongly recommend 97 millimeters because you're going to be able to go faster. And you're also going to be able to conserve momentum and therefore save energy, so your range is also going to be farther. It does make the board a little bit taller. It also makes it harder to accelerate and decelerate, but it really doesn't make that much a difference for acceleration and deceleration. They might be a little bit more pricier, but they're definitely worth it. And you're buying these off eBay, and you're not buying the super high-end name brand ones. It's totally worth it. And these are the bearings that it came with, and these are more than adequate. These are insanely good bearings for just buying them off eBay. But 97 millimeter is standard for me. 83 millimeters also common. They make ones that are smaller, but those are typically what you find on Walmart boards or anything that's really insanely cheap. Besides the fact that they're 97 millimeter, is that they also have 78 durameter. So durameter is actually a rating for how soft the wheels are, and because there's no form of shock absorbers or anything on your electric skateboard setup, these are the only shocks that you have. And so 78 is actually the softest you can buy wheels. The reason I got white wheels at the beginning was because I was afraid that a darker color would melt. But I'm doing some more reading. I'm very confident that these wheels are going to be fine. I'm not going to get any flat spots on them from melting. Because they are made out of rubber after all. But if you squeeze really hard, they are kind of squishy. But you definitely want to go for the softest wheel you can find. And the softest wheel usually is 78A or 78 durameter. These are also called fly wheels, and you want to make sure you get fly wheels for your setup because that's the only way you can get these screws in there for your back wheel, is because the flywheel has that open design concept. So make sure you get flywheels for your setup. You're going to need a kit that contains the pulley with the bolts a front ring here to actually screw things onto, and then you're gonna need a corresponding piece that sits on the motor. DIYelectricskateboard.com sells kits where you can buy all this stuff together. The best deal I found was on some website from some company out of China. It took me like a month to get these, but I only paid about 30 bucks. So the reason I ordered this kit from this website is because it has the exact ratio that I wanted to maximize my speed, which was a 36 tooth to 16 tooth ratio. Like I said, I don't know a whole lot about engineering and how gear ratios work, but I know that that's a strongly recommended ratio. And the other thing you need to know, in that kit came the belt that you're going to need, and it came with two different lengths of belt. It came with a 266 millimeter belt, but also came with a 256 millimeter belt. I use the longer one, that's just the way I have my setup, but I'm thinking about going to the smaller one. It just depends on what motor mount you have. But if you want to know specifically the links to all this stuff, please message me and then I can get you the links to where I bought all this. So I actually had a hard time getting this little red piece off of the motor. You'll find most commonly that most motors have a keyway that the pulley sits on, but this is actually a set screw that screws in right there. And I was going to ruin the screw by trying to get it out, so I just left it on. But the set screw works fine. The keyway works fine too. It doesn't matter. Just make sure your motor has a keyway if that's the route you go. So before I get into electronics, the other piece of hardware that you need is the motor mount. So this is the motor mount. You can see it screws on to the motor. There's actually screws that sit in all these little grooves. And this piece, which tightens down on the truck, screws in here. And I'll talk about more about how to install this, but this helps you adjust the angle that you put your motor when you mount it to your trucks. I bought this off Amazon, also for a really good price. Really recommend just buying off Amazon. This fits about just any motor you buy, and Amazon has the best deal. Okay, so now let's talk about electronics. Number one thing you're going to need besides a motor and a battery, which we'll talk about in a second, is a speed control. This is the little computer that decides how fast your skateboard's going to go. It decides how much current and voltage to send to the motor from the battery and vice versa. I bought this one for $100 off DIYelectricskateboards.com. Believe it or not, $100 is actually pretty cheap for a speed control. And the reason I say that is because this actually has a 50 amp limit. My entire setup can withstand about 80 amps. So this is really just a starter one. This is actually kind of limiting what I can do. But you can buy them off Amazon. Amazon has a few DIY electric skateboards. You can buy just about any speed control. Even if you know how to program, you can program one. Just a little computer that programs your board. I will say though, one of the big things about buying it off of DIY electric skateboards is that it came with this little plug, and so there was no soldering involved. All I had to do was plug all the parts in. Same thing with the motor. All these plug into the motor. You do want to make sure though when you buy the speed control that you get this wire that comes with it. This is called a male servo connector, and the reason you need it and to make sure it comes with your speed control is that this is what connects from your speed control to your Bluetooth adapter that you need for your remote. So make sure you buy this. With that said, let's move on to the remote. So actually, the remote is what gave me the biggest headaches for this project. This is the little Bluetooth adapter that it comes with. This is the remote, and there's also a loop key that comes with this. That is what actually binds the two together when you first pair them. This is the trigger style. Things about this remote is it doesn't have any riding modes, so most remotes on electric skateboards have like a beginner, an intermediate, and an expert. Some have reverse. This one doesn't have reverse, it just has forward and it has brake. The reason I got this one is because the other style that I had, which is this style right here with a tab that you push back and forth and has buttons for different riding modes. I got that one at first off eBay. It didn't work. And DIY electric skateboards did the same exact thing, and I wasn't going to trust it. So I went ahead and ordered this one for 60 bucks off DIY electric skateboards. It was actually super high. I would recommend seeing if you could find another site that sell these. I would just make sure, you have to make sure it comes with a Bluetooth adapter and a loop key. The other problem that I have with this is this right here. See how it's flashing? That means that it's not getting current constantly. And the problem is that when I'm on the board, the signal goes in and out. So if I'm accelerating, then I'm constantly losing signal. That's very dangerous. So I've got to find a more long-term solution for this. Just like I do with the speed control. I'm eventually going to get a better speed control. That way my board will go faster. The other thing about that remote is that it runs off batteries. Like batteries you buy at the store. So I actually have Energizer rechargeable batteries that I use. It doesn't die very often, but I do replace them just to make sure they don't die while on the board, so I replace them regularly. Some remotes have rechargeable batteries, some don't. Okay, next thing let's talk about is the motor. So the key thing you have to understand about electric skateboards is that it's considered an RC device. It runs off RC parts. So this is an RC motor for RC vehicles. RC vehicles are like remote control cars, remote control helicopters, airplanes. This is a PPM remote, which is used for that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of thing you need to be looking for. And so when you see this, it may look like a small motor, but this thing is actually gigantic. This thing is huge compared to what actually fits inside regular RC vehicles. This is actually a 190 kV 6374 motor. So that means that it's 63 here and 74 here, which the reason the dimensions of the motor matter is because that's actually how much power you can generate. The 190 kV has nothing to do with power at all. This motor actually has the capability of developing 350 watts of power, which is a lot. More than enough than you could ever possibly need for going up hills, for getting top speed. Most people do dual setups who have the money to. Doing a dual setup means you have 2 speed controls and you have 2 motors. I have a single setup because this is more than what you could ever possibly need for just skateboarding around campus. Dual setups are usually have insane torque to get up and down hills, insane braking. It takes a little bit longer to accelerate and brake than a single setup, but most people who afford it do a dual setup. It's typically better. 190 kV. So I bought this board off DIYelectricskateboards.com. Hobby King has a very comparable motor for a lot cheaper, almost half the price. I'd recommend just getting it there. But one of the nice things about this is that it also came with all of these plugs. It came with a sensor cable. You don't have to use it to run the board. This is made for electric skateboards, whereas Hobby King sells motors and parts for a variety of RC vehicles. Now the 190 kV refers to rotations per volt. So when you multiply 190 times the voltage of your battery, which I'll show you mine in just a second. For instance, this is a 44.4 volt battery. When you get 190 times 44.4, that is the maximum amount of rotations that you can get out of this motor. Typically, a lower kV rating is better than a higher kV rating. A lower kV rating means it's more efficient, doesn't get as hot, can handle more voltage. More voltage means more power, which means faster for longer. A higher kV value means your motor is going to burn out a lot quicker. So typically, you want to look for something that's the biggest motor to generate the most power, but you also want to look for a low kV value. That way your motor can actually take in more voltage and use more of that power, if that makes sense. This was $120 on DIY Electric Skateboards. Like I said, I found one on Hobby King. It was like a 63, 64, I think. It was just a little bit smaller. Also 190 kV for about $75. So this is more than what you need. People with 6355 can get up the same hills that I go up and down. So it's just really how safe do you feel with the motor that you have and how comfortable are you. That's really what matters. This motor does go insanely fast though when taken in its maximum voltage. Okay, transitioning to the most expensive part of your board. This is the battery. This was almost half the cost of making the entire board. The reason also is because I bought this from DIY Electric Skateboards, but this also came with a lot of stuff. I didn't just buy the battery. You have to make sure you have a charger to charge the thing. It also came with a case, which not only fits the battery, but also has a space for all my electronic components right here with little slots. So that way it can hook up to the motor. Let's talk about some of the specs. You can read this, which I can't really because it's mirrored. This is a 12S 4P battery, which means this has 12 cells in a series and 4 parallel, which just is a fancy way of saying we're getting the maximum power you can get out of 12 cells. Okay, so 44.4 volts, that is the output voltage of this battery that's used in calculating how much power can actually go to the motor. It also helps you also have to, when calculating what your minimum, like what is your battery cutoff value, that's you use this, 12 amp hours also used for that. And I don't really want to go into a lot of the electronical components. I want this to be more of a video about what should I buy rather than actually how you do a lot of the stuff. You have to understand when you're buying a battery, most commonly people use LiPo batteries, which have a tendency to burn up. And they're also a pain in the butt to charge from what I've experienced. This is a lithium ion battery like you find in a drill or a phone or laptop or anything. This has insane battery life. I've not maxed out my range yet. I'm thinking I've gone like 20 miles and still had about 40% battery life left. So this thing's insane. The other nice thing about it, and buying one off DIY electric skateboards, came with this plug to plug everything in. Again, no soldering or anything. Came with an on and off switch. Came with a battery indicator level, and it also came with a place to charge it. This thing was very expensive. If you go on DIY electric skateboards, it's about 450 bucks. The people get away with 10S. Some people have 8S. It really depends on how far you really want to go. I mean, I use my board around my campus here at Purdue, and you really don't need something this massive. It's also insanely heavy. I think it's about 6 pounds by itself. You really don't need something this massive if you just want to go around college campuses. I think most boards on average, especially the ones you buy from like Boosted or Lift boards or Meepo or any of those batteries, those typically have a range of like anywhere from 7 to 14. This has like a maximum range of like 30 to 40 miles. Now the other thing I want to talk about with the speed control and the motor and the battery is that with this setup, I have it set so that way whenever I'm braking, say I'm going down a hill or say I'm actually braking, the motor reverses when it brakes, and so all the energy generated by reversing the motor then goes back to the battery. So that's why I have a really hard time gauging what the range is of my board, just because whenever I brake, I'm actually charging the battery. So I bought this off DIYelectricskateboards.com. There are other people out there who are trying to make their own batteries. There's a ton of places you can buy LiPo batteries. I really didn't find another place to buy this. The only really other places that I found where I could buy this are places that you could buy it in bulk orders of like 10 or more. You're going to find that with a lot of the parts in the DIY industry right now. We're really starting to get to the point where we're finding a lot of electric skateboard specific parts, but they're very, very expensive. I want to get my endorsement for this battery, but I will say that most people that think they want this is the biggest battery you can buy right now for electric skateboards. And as much as I want to say get it, please support the company I bought this from, but I'm telling you this is way more than you could ever need. You're talking about like a 30-35 mile range on this battery, which for most people is completely unnecessary. I recommend going for spending somewhere between $200 to $350 on your battery. If you're spending less than that, you're getting something cheap and it's going to explode or it's not going to last. Or if you spend the money, you're going to buy it once, it's going to last forever. And that was kind of my thinking about this. I thought, well, if I bought a cheaper battery, I was going to upgrade at some point. And so I really just wanted to go ahead and spend the money now to get this one. So last thing I'll say about electronics is, like I said, the range is about 30 miles, 35 miles on my board, I think. Top speed is actually capped by the speed control. So the speed control cap is at 50 amps, so it puts my max speed somewhere in the high 20s. This board definitely has the potential to go somewhere 35, almost 40 miles an hour, especially with the 97mm wheels. But given the speed control, it limits me to about 25 to 28 miles per hour. So the other thing I want to make sure that you guys get for your DIY electric skateboard is a case. This is very, very important, and the reason this is important is because this has some big scratches on it already, and imagine if you hit a gigantic rock or a huge puddle and it got all over your battery, all over your electronics, and it just destroyed everything. But protecting that really expensive battery is really important to me. This came from DIY Electric Skateboards as well. It came with the battery. I'm going to do something about the logo on there, not sure what yet, but I really don't like that gigantic logo on there, so I'm going to do something about it. What's nice about this case that it houses everything. All the electronics, has a place for the battery indicator. I don't like the fact that this is open because I've had a lot of issues with water getting in there, so I'm going to seal this off somehow. But I do like the fact that there's a space for all my electronics right here, which I'm going to tape in and actually use Velcro to keep everything in place. So the other thing I want to let you guys know is that most of these parts don't come with their own screws. The motor mount came with screws for the two parts to screw those together, but it didn't come with any screws for the motor. The trucks didn't come with any screws. The case came with screws, but I didn't like them. So I actually ended up going to the hardware store and buying screws. I probably spent about 20 bucks because I got everything stainless steel. And I bought individual screws, which is always way expensive. So just make sure you have whatever screws you have work. I wanted stainless steel because I didn't want anything that was going to rust. You don't need to get anything that's like heat treated or something because this setup really doesn't get that hot. I also got lock nuts. You just want to make sure you get lock nuts because otherwise this nut's going to vibrate off and everything's going to detach from itself. So make sure you get lock nuts. I did want to go ahead and give everybody the heads up that you're going to have to buy your own screws. So those are all the components that you need to build your electric skateboard. The things I'm going to talk about now are the things that are optional. It means they're not required, but strongly recommended for your setup. Number one thing is Velcro. These are all Velcro strips that I'm using for my VESC, the Bluetooth adapter, all the electronics, so they're not bouncing around on the inside of that case. And this setup that also, all this came with the battery. These are actually, right here, are strips or loops that actually are for holding the battery in place. I'm actually going to use those in addition to the case just to hold the battery in place. That way it's not also bobbing up and down because there is a little bit of play in there inside that case. Just make sure it holds it in place. I strongly recommend using Velcro over anything else because it will stay attached. The other thing that came with the battery is a weather strip. This goes around the edge of the case, keeps water out of the case, very important. Strongly recommend using something to seal the case off, that way it keeps it out of the weather. Strong recommend. Electrical tape for wrapping things up together, that's what I used, recommend that. Thread lock is a must. You'll see this in the video when I put everything together that I'm going to thread lock everything on the motors. Using removable is fine, you just want to make sure you have some sort of thread lock to lock everything in the motor because all the vibration is completely felt by the motor from the wheels. So all those screws that attach everything to the motor are just going to completely fall off. And trust me, the board has like a 5-mile limit before all the screws come out. So you want to make sure you thread lock everything that has to do with the motor because none of the screws on the motor actually have lock nuts. Everything just screws in. So that's why you have to use thread lock.